we could call it a KPI, but one of the objectives you have set for the governance table in terms of the development of the Maori Engagement Framework. And you'll also recall that I took you through some concepts around the IAP2 model, as well as the new approach that's recommended via Māori Crown Relations. And as elected members, you had started a conversation around how we're feeling, what does this look like, but what Brent and I were looking for was enough guidance so that we could go away and test our thinking with our Māori partners, with the view to bring back a project brief for council to endorse before we went ahead and started the work. And there was some really good conversation amongst elected members, but we obviously had to finish early because we had a extraordinary risk and assurance committee meeting, and so we made a commitment to make sure that we'd put time in today's agenda so that you could continue the conversation. So I'm going to stop the talking and hopefully allow more conversation across elected members, where I think from memory about half of you had shared your perspectives, but there was some more of you to talk about what your thinking was, and then what I'll try and do is navigate a way forward, so that I've got some direction on how you'd like me to take this work forward.
I'm happy to start off. Well, no, I spoke to Let's Take Some Space to discuss it, so I didn't actually share my thinking because I wanted to focus in on one of the community outcome, and so the first, under partnership with Tangata Whenua, the first bullet point there is we will uphold te tiriti and its principles, and I've long been of the view that that's the right approach in terms of the principles. What I don't like there is that I think it should be there should be reference to the Treaty of Waitangi / te tiriti, because we know that the challenge that we face in this space is that there's essentially arguments about interpretation of two different texts, and so that's hence why we have principles, because it's about the spirit of the document rather than its literal words. And so for me that's a really important thing I'd like to see changed, and I think it then colours the ultimately the what the framework looks like underneath, because it's driven by the principles, and I'm really clear that we have really good definition of the principles from the courts and the Waitangi Tribunal, and so that's a really useful starting point. And the only other thing I'll say is that after the discussion last week, I went around and had a bit of a hunt round to see what other councils do, and for me the Waikato Regional Council Māori framework seemed like a really good model, and it had a lot of components to it that really resonated with me, and it talked about in a really clear way when resourcing or remuneration is required, at what level, and what that looks like, because I think that ultimately a financial component and the resourcing component enable that participation and involvement and working with council is a really important part of it. And so I liked that being inside the document. So if others want to that, I think it's a really good model or blueprint for us to perhaps borrow, steal from, and obviously also, further enhance from a Horowhenua perspective. So, yeah.
And so, Councillor Jennings, just so that I'm hearing you right, because of course today wouldn't be the day that Council debated what they'd change their community outcome to, but what I'm hearing from you is, in scope of this project, you would like a review of the community outcome.
Also, the community outcomes will be reviewed as part of the long-term plan proper anyway. And so for me, I think what it is, and I'm happy to pursue that, put that propose change on the table at that point, if that's the appropriate avenue. For me, I think the bullet point is clear that we're upholding the principles, and so there's no significant urgency. I'm not saying, oh gosh, we need to change this immediately, but I think for clarification, we need to be really clear about that. And that's what I bring to the table. I'm aware that not everyone will agree with me on that.
So, look, and this is me exposing more ignorance than knowledge, but my understanding is thinking has evolved, and that the challenge now is to say, should we be focusing on the principles, or should we be focusing on te tiriti? And they talk about te tiriti, not the two versions. The thinking being that we need to understand the Indigenous point of view as a way forward. And I think again, please correct me if I'm ignorant, but I think that is sort of an international interpretation, that where there are two versions, that the Indigenous, I'll just finish, Sam, and then you jump in, that the Indigenous version is the one that should hold the conversation, that's where it most importantly stands. So I think that's a sort of a ground level discussion before we can move forward, as an understanding of the relevance of it used to be, the 3 Ps or whatever, it used to be the principles, but now it's actually a focus on te tiriti. So this is a ground up conversation before we can move forward.
I'm not sure about the principle you talked about in terms of preferring the Indigenous view. I think what you might be referencing is, in contract law, there's generally a view that if the party that doesn't, if there's an issue about interpretation of a contract, the interpretation should often favour the party that didn't draft the contract. That's a little more complex. I've really simplified that, but and so take that view, but you always have to look at broader context, and I think that's why we're in the position that we are in with the principles. And I don't know if anyone has read the guidance that comes from the Waitangi Tribunal about how the courts have interpreted and how it's tried to resolve a number of these conflicting text issues. But that provides a really good, in my view, a really useful starting point, because it's very factual. It takes you through sort of a history of the evolution of various court cases and Waitangi Tribunal commentary. I'll leave it there.
I have to say I was a little bit lost, Sam. So what are we reviewing for a start?
So what I was advocating for is just in terms of one of our community outcomes, it references just te tiriti, not the Treaty of Waitangi. And so one of the things that I'm keen to, as I say, at the right point in time, is to put that on the table, because I think it's important that we're, and maybe this is the debate, is that as a council we're not signalling that we prefer one text over the other, because that's the issue, is that there's two texts of a treaty that arguably, that conflict in terms of their meaning and interpretation of certain terms. Hence why our jurisprudence have got us to a set of principles, and that's what we should be upholding and applying, in my opinion.
I'm pretty comfortable with how it currently sits. Look forward to further debate on that.
Yeah.
Could you put your presentation up from last week just to jog the memory?
Sam, Councillor Jennings. What page on our plan are we talking about? This community statement or this community? What document or what page was it?
Right at the beginning of the long-term plan, and
Plan on a page and it's that first column.
yeah.
So, Jonathan, when I introduced the presentation last week, you'll remember the visuals I used where I connected it back to the 5 community outcomes, and of which partnership with Tangata Whenua is one of our community outcomes. And so I kind of acknowledge that that's a really important reference point for us, because that reminds us as to why it's important. And because it's really important we don't get into a debate about this right now. What I'm hearing from Councillor Jennings is that part of the guidance he'd like to give, which obviously will return back to Council for debate, is in the scope of this work, acknowledging we've got a long-term plan that we're going to do where you will review your community outcomes. He'd like some consideration given to how we currently only reference Te Tiriti or Waitangi. Is that a fair representation of your views, Sam? I'm still keen to hear some other perspectives, because it's fair to say that right now I'm not sure I have any really clear direction on what you want me to do, other than I would offer that I haven't had, I'm going to use my favourite phrase, Clint, I haven't had you throw pieces of paper at me in a complete allergic reaction that says this is not important, we don't want to do this, and of course reminding you that just a couple of months ago you said this is important.
So, I just love how we put things absolutely through the complicator. We've got 5 community outcomes that this council has developed, adopted, and carry our actions out by. And what we're trying to do is develop a high-level strategy of engagement with Māori. So we've got the principles already here, and I acknowledge what Sam's talking about, the treaty. But surely a high-level strategy of engagement that will be based on everything we do, on what we've adopted as one of our 5 primary outcomes. As a council, surely we should be able to develop a high-level strategy, and out of that will form, no doubt, lots of actions, lots of outcomes that can be developed on the way. But surely what we're trying to do is develop a high-level strategy for a start. I'm not quite sure why we're putting it through not you, us, I'm talking us, through the complicator as we are.
Look, councillors, I don't think you should be afraid of the fact that you're this is going to take some time. It's a really important conversation, and hopefully the team can get the slides up on the screen shortly. But just reminding you that, my challenge to you as elected members was I need you to set the tone, because it's really important that you own the tone of this work in order for Brent and I to have the confidence to go away and work with our staff, to engage with iwi, to bring back something to you that is going to work, because we could do more damage to partnerships if we go off and have a conversation if you have not been up for this in the first place. But I also asked for your feedback around what would it look like if we developed a working party with iwi and hapu and obviously council to help guide this work. But ultimately we were just looking for a flavour of a conversation so we could go away, establish a project brief. And there were a number of you that liked the idea of the working party. From memory, like Jonathan and Rogan, your message was just go do it. But there was, what we wanted to do is make sure that there was enough of a conversation so that we go away and do stuff that we're not going to get in trouble for.
And I would agree with that sort of process. This morning, actually, I got online and
look for some Maori Crown relationship frameworks, and there is guidelines for engagement with Maori set by the Crown, which basically talks about engage early, be inclusive, think broadly, and that effective and genuine engagement supports relationships that are based on trust and confidence. So there's enough already set in stone, and with Sam's talk of Waikato Regional Council and documents like this, surely we can come up with something that, is at least the start of a conversation that then gets into us to be able to set something for the Horowhenua in terms of what we want to do.
To me, those are some really nice shiny words and a whole lot of lack of action as in terms of what those policies and frameworks say. And I would like to see a framework we develop that drills a little deeper into what we're actually going to do and who we're going to engage with and when we're going to engage with them. Yeah, some more specifics and local context. Having a great, shiny, high-level statement would be nice, but, I mean, we could do that in the one paragraph that we've already got in front of all of us. Having something that actually says what we're going to do when it comes to the crunch and a step-by-step process and how we're going to do it is what I would see a framework being.
I agree with Mayor Burney that the pathway is already laid out with Te Arawhiti. I mean, if you look at the Waikato one and the Te Arawhiti document, the Waikato one's just followed the Te Arawhiti document and merged it with their obligations under treaty settlements. But I mean, I think the failure of all these engagement processes and documents and plans is that we fail to engage early. And so we need to engage early with our partners and have that working group to at least inform them that, hey, we're going to follow the lines of, say, Te Arawhiti or some other process. I think, we can't have too many more meetings on this without having our partners in the room talking about it as well.
I think that's quite a good point in terms of that's when I came away from last week, how easy or uneasy did I feel the fact that we didn't have our partners in. And I refer back to how were people feeling 2 hours ago when we were talking about Waka Kotahi's view of HDC in partnership, and that's the same feeling that our iwi partners, I believe, would have if we actually go too much further down the path of developing a framework without starting at square one with them in the room telling us what it looks like. And I think that's really important, because otherwise they're going to be less engaged and they will be feeling like we were feeling. Again, asking the question, are we partners or are we not? And that's a question that's already being raised. So I think, we've got to push forward with this work. We can't wait. Working groups are a really good place to start, and I'd really like to see that iwi engagement and that conversation start sooner before we progress conversations to beyond nuts and bolts, while accepting a lot of the mahi has already been done by others, that we can source that and use that to help inform whatever our framework ends up looking like.
So are we feeling like there's enough consensus to give direction? Because this is all it was about giving some direction. Because you've already agreed as a table to develop a Māori engagement framework. And what we've come to you with is let's check that we all understand what that might mean. And we've come to you with we think the Māori engagement framework needs to at least talk about what is the kaupapa, who to engage with, how to engage, and when should we engage, without answering those questions, because we don't, it's not appropriate, kind of just as you've alluded to, Councillor Grimstone, that we don't get too far down the track. But what I'm hearing, but I want to test this, is that there is enough support for Brent and I to work with the team to progress the notion of the development of the working party, to have our iwi partners as part of this conversation from as early as possible to guide the thinking on the project brief that will come back to this table. Any contrary views or?
I just want to clarify this reference to when we engage, because that for me, I'm not sure when you say that. Is it? Are you saying that sort of aligned to the? Is it IAP 2 or what's the model? The inform through to empower. Yeah. Which yeah. Well, so that is an example.
This is probably the more modern way to look at it. So that
could have generic statements about when engagement occurs, but in terms of the actual detail of when we're going to engage, for me, I'm really clear that needs to be in a separate agreed partnership agreement with each of the different iwi, because there's going to be different wins depending on what the subject matter is. If it's dog fees, but the when and what is going to be different than if it's dealing with a watercourse, and so like that detail shouldn't go in the framework. So the framework needs to set out a clear trajectory in terms of what the framework is intended to do, and that then anticipates some further agreement around how the relationship and partnership will work in practice, and what the resourcing looks like. For me, the detail of that shouldn't sit inside the framework. The framework is just the big picture, and then it enables something underneath it.
Well, and I suppose what I'd offer is that we've got to have that conversation with iwi partners, because all I'm saying is that we need to have some form of reference point to when should we engage, and that I don't think that means the level of detail that you're speaking to, but it might be some principles around, for example, we engage early, and you might see that aligned to the continuum of the interests that exist, and therefore the way in which you engage. But yeah, I think that's an important point, Sam, that you should pursue through the process. But let's hear what our partners have to say about that.
I was thinking along the lines of not that detailed and not that far down the track, but our partners, that's Maori and iwi, need to be in the room to design the engagement framework together. And they can decide if they want that level of detail in the engagement framework or not. And that clarifies a lot of your downstream issues as well. You might have an iwi which says, no, I'm only interested in this aspect in engaging. And so then you don't have to go through every single point in our operations. So it's more efficient that way. I mean, the old model is what you're saying, is that we go around with iwi, we form MOUs or MOPs to work together on various issues that canvass all the minute issues that the council might do. And then you end up with a whole mess of confusion and a whole range of different iwi, different hapu, different individuals having a say on different topics as well.
I think there's a bit of a point there in terms of who are we engaging with. I mean, we have, correct me if I'm wrong, 3 different groups that are iwi for this area. I mean, it does not seem to me to be an unreasonable expectation that if for engagement with HDC, that these 3 groups can actually come up with a not unified in a combative sense, but some sort of unity so they can be approached as one group. I don't think that's unreasonable. Otherwise, are we not going to end up in this fragmentation of, we talk to these ones and they're all good with it, but those ones aren't, or these ones are okay and they're pissed off, or what? So is there any point in having a framework if it achieves that? And as for anything else, well, guess you know what I think. The only other thing I'd say in regard to this generally is that we talked briefly about values in terms of setting up a framework. To me, all the values I have around governance and government spring from democracy. And this is the last thing I'm going to say about this forever, well, however long forever is, but basically democracy is the fountainhead from which my values spring. And this whole thing, I sincerely don't see the whole thing, and when I'm talking about our references to the idea of partnership or what was said and what wasn't, and all that, and you've already heard what I've had to say about that. I don't see democracy in any of that that's gone before where we are now in considering this. And I don't actually see democracy in its truest sense going a lot forward a long way from this either. So, anyway, for the record or whichever.
Thanks, guys. I don't have a lot to say other than you've come here for some direction, and so my direction would be supporting you continue to engage our partners. I think just alerting to them that the council are undertaking a review of how we engage our partners, and sharing there's some frameworks that have been shared that as starting points, and form the working group. I think the rest of it drops out of conversation, but I mean, we can talk around the stars here. I'll be honest, partnership agreements mean nothing to me. MOUs mean nothing to me. My bond is the treaty that I operate under.
So do you support the engagement framework or not?
100%.
So does that mean then that, okay, we're probably getting towards a way forward? Does that mean when we do have those initial conversations outlined by Jonathan, Justin, and others, we start with a blank page? Yeah. Knowing that we've got these guidance documents that others have, that we can refer to.
We'll absolutely share this presentation with iwi partners, and we'll do it in the context of we were trying to set context for elected members to make sure that we had the mandate to go away and to start the conversation, because that's all that this is about. This is about getting permission, but also checking that we've got you as elected members setting the tone for kind of the next steps that will follow. But I don't think there's any predetermined views on what this looks like at the end, albeit there are some really good reference points, being the Waikato Regional Strategy. The Wellington one is also good. Te Arawhiti obviously provide us stuff, but we need to talk to our iwi partners.
I think, in all honesty, the engagement's going to be with them individually at the initial point, with an ambition to create a working party that represents all the parties with our council, and that a framework potentially is developed that all partners can live with in a way in which we operate together in our district. And those initial meetings for me will determine how much buy-in there are by our iwi partners, and you may find some don't want to be a part of it at all, which will determine or change perhaps what that framework is going to look like as it's developed. So baby steps, I think, is what I heard you say, Monique.
Any other perspectives before I wrap up and maybe try and summarise where to from here? So our next steps will be that we will go have those individual conversations with our iwi partners. We'll, test their thinking, seek their input, and willingness to be part of this process. Referencing Councillor Tamihana's baby steps, the intention would be that when we're at a point in time, we'd bring a paper back to council that forms the work to enable the formal establishment of the working party, and we'd obviously be looking for councillor representatives on that, and at the same time would be working with our iwi partners to ensure they were represented on that working party, and while we might provide some this is some general guidance about the approach we're going to take. We of course won't want to be getting ahead of ourselves in terms of how the working party might want that work to evolve, but what we will need is council to endorse the scope, because it's obviously the scope of the project that we as officers need to operate in.
So what does that mean for your current relationships and arrangements that you have in place?
So our current relationships and arrangements exist. I think it's going to take some time for us to get to this, to an outcome with this work, which will inform, no doubt, the way we enter or evolve partnerships and relationships into the future. But this, unless council are going to give me direction otherwise, my understanding is this is a and, it's not a or.
Could I just ask, alongside that, there was a piece of work mentioned last week, and I think it was Councillor Allen that, like the treaty training, was encouraging participation from us, and there might be a few that don't make it, and I understand the feelings towards that, but I wondered at what point, because that's scheduled for August, and that's good because we'll get the LTP out of the way and adopt that and then move on to some new stuff. But I guess I don't know what, maybe because it's for elected members, we have a chance to understand what or form what that might look like or not. And I guess where I'm coming from is that we need, this is a journey, and ideally we wouldn't leave each other behind, and maybe that's just a romantic thought, but I think if you have you're apprehensive around, because look, I'll admit some of that can come across threatening or intimidating, or it really comes down to how it's delivered, I believe. But there is value in the education and actually understanding the facts and histories, and there is a balanced view can be provided, and you can still gain an appreciation and with that and make better decisions ultimately. But yeah, I guess I'll just leave it there. I mean, I've got some suggestions, but yeah, maybe that's for later.
Yeah, thanks for that, Councillor Tukapo. And Councillor Tukapo has offered support and guidance to me to make sure that what you've talked to me about previously, Pity, is making sure that the training and development we offer elected members is appropriate, given A, the journey, but B, that you are elected members, you are making some of the really critical decision making, and I know that Councillor Tukapo has offered up some suggestions about people that she has seen that have done that really, really well. So, if everyone's comfortable, I was going to lean on Pity for advice through that process. But if there's others that want to provide advice, because of it's important. Yeah, absolutely welcome that.
Probably more so interested in the advice being given than being a part of it, to be honest.
Slight comment from me on that. that I'd like some more kind of local and historical context. I know the training that you've got planned, having heard reviews of how it went last year, sounds really good, but I don't know if there's much local and historic context that would be pretty valuable for a lot of us in this room to kind of understand how people here are feeling.
Totally. So definitely the local context. Just for some peace of mind, some of the examples of suggestions I made was Dr. Bronwyn Campbell, who's one of our staffs. You know, I know you know who that is, Justin, and she's really great. And some of the examples I gave was, you know, these words in that outcome partnership with tangata whenua. There's words in there like mana whenua, wahi tapu, taonga, kaitiaki, tangata whenua, and it's really we don't all know what those words mean, right? Like we're not really clear. I'm talking about all of us, and it's really nice to have understand the origins of the word, what it actually means, how it applies in today and for the different groups. So, yeah, I mean, that's where I was going as a sort of advice. It wasn't, so there will be parts of different things, and that's why I say I welcome everyone's input, and definitely the local context is again part of that.
Look, I think that's discussion for the partners, to be completely honest.
So that was something that I did signal last time, was just us coming together and understanding and getting a sense of history and the treaty and so on. And I wasn't sure how that would happen. I pegged it on to the training day thinking that's the only game in town, but I really value that you've been proactive in actually saying we can maybe do better and explore other ways. So I personally want to thank you for taking the initiative on that.
Sorry, Justin, I should have mentioned that there is that component to it, that whilst it might not all happen in one day, because you just couldn't do it justice otherwise, the whole marae visits to both iwi and they shape their own, whatever that looks like, and so it's a combination of things. It's not this or that. It's because I know there's many around the table looking forward to those marae visits, and so it would be up to those respective groups to provide that and what that day looks like. So it's I'm not trying to exclude that input. It's I'm just not giving. I guess I'm not explaining myself as well.
Cool. Any other perspectives? Well, thank you for the direction to keep going, but obviously to keep going through the lens of needing to continue really meaningful discussion with our partners.